for giving me the short straw. All right, so there's been a whole field of academic papers written on what is augmented reality, what is virtual reality, etc. And so my interpretation of it is it's the computer equivalent of a hallucination. It's creating visual and auditory and sensory information when you're in the real world that looks like it's there when it's not. And so for me, that's the simplest definition. So an example, a very good example, is the application that was being produced by IKEA. And you can hold up a phone and it shows you a picture of your living room. You can walk around your living room, and then you can grab a three-dimensional model of a sofa from their stock list and position it in your room and walk around it as if it was there. And that includes shadows and lighting and an awful lot of subtlety. So things don't have to be subtle, but that's a good example of a use of a digital fantasy or digital phantasm that has a practical purpose integrated with the real world. That's a long answer, I'm very sorry.
No, I think that's a good example, Mike. No, I think that's a really good example. It blends really the digital, or as Mike says, the imaginary with the real world through the lens of a smartphone, for instance, or a screen. And so, yeah, no, I think that's a perfect explanation.
Right, now for the next hard question. I think it's definitely Joe's turn.
No, that's not fair. Why is it me already?
You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Let's leave the conversation for the third part of the section. We are curious to see your video and what you want to
right.
talk
Okay,
about.
we'll do that. Okay, so let's talk about practical experiences. So yeah. I wrote my first 3D program when I was a kid on a BBC Micro, and I'd hate to tell you how long ago that was, but I definitely had hair. And I developed an obsession with 3D and I did a degree. And when I was 20, a long time ago, I decided it would be a great idea to put a monitor into a cradle with some sensors, so that when you look through a kind of a periscope thing, a beam splitter, you could actually look around the world, and it was computer generated, because I discovered the joys of computer generated imagery. This was in 1986. And I've been involved in virtual reality and augmented reality since then. So, and I'm practical about it, which means that I don't believe the hype. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a video. And this video is from a project that I was involved with. And it's about training first responders using augmented reality. And what we'll do is we'll turn the sound off, and I'll describe what you're seeing and also some of the issues that happened during the project and are still true today. So if you let me share the screen, and if I share the target video, share, you should be able to see that. And if I go full screen, and if I hit play, so this is a Horizon 2020 project, which was working with a number of first responder agencies, including the German Police College, the Catalonia Training College for Police, Guardia Civil, which is the Civil Guard for Spain, ENSP, which is the Police College for France, and Cleveland Fire Brigade. So a good selection of users, and oh dear, there's a man there. But if I go quickly back into the video so you can get a look, that happened very, very quickly. So one of the parts of the project, if I pause it, there was 6 training content, one of which was to do with tactical firearms training, and using Microsoft HoloLens version 1. And so that's one of the 6 training content. Some of the training content did not use augmented reality, it uses other tools and techniques, and but a number of the training content did. And there's my co-worker, Dr. Rob McCall from LIST, who's very good at this sort of thing. So what we'll do is we'll wind forward, and you'll get a bit more of a picture of what is going on. So another application, apart from tactical firearms, was to do with road traffic incidents and providing visibility and situational awareness and understanding of a road traffic incident. And virtual reality is very good for that, for providing spatial context, for providing this virtual world, this imaginary space, completely imaginary. You can immerse somebody in and provide that sort of information. So it was a complicated project, and we were doing everything from critical national infrastructure protection to firearms to civil unrest through to a cyber attack on the power grid. So there were 6 different training content, some of which was using augmented reality, and some of which was using drones to do photographic surveys. So let's try and find a bit more of an interesting part of the video. Go through, and here we go. So here is one of the other parts where you can see they talk about the training of the police being very expensive and very difficult. So there were in fact 2 police-led exercises, one of which was going into a space where there was a drugs gang, and you had to then interact with virtual players and decide when and where, what you were going to do and how you're going to respond and whether you're going to shoot them or not. And you have to make the decision very quickly. And the second one was a training vignette, which had a number of different ways that it could go, but it may not necessarily have involved using a firearm. But it required you to situationally assess the characters and the people and react to the augmentations as if they were real. And we did in fact do tracking on weapons. And the final one we did, I forgot about this one, very important one, because this is actually turning into a real product now, is using augmented reality to train teams going into radiation environments for forensic and rescue purposes. So you can see these people are wearing a breathing apparatus and they're going into the environment and they are assessing the scene, taking measurements and taking samples. So that's sort of the background for the use of very, very quick and very poor, I'm afraid, a description of some examples of using augmented reality in first responder situations. So if I now stop the share and we'll discuss it. So what did we learn? We learned a lot. So we were very lucky to be able to get hold of 6 very early on, 6 Microsoft HoloLens version 1s. We've now got HoloLens version 2s. There are a whole series of practical issues with brightness. So when you are wearing a set of smart glasses, these glasses you put on your head that mixes the real world that you're seeing with basically TV pictures and going to each eye, so it seems like it's 3D. That mixing process and the way that they do the optical path isn't very bright. So that it's okay for certain sets of tasks. If you're inside a training center, it's okay, but you are kind of interacting with will-o'-the-wisps, things that aren't quite real. You can see through them, and that tends to break the immersion. The other problem, and everybody talks about field of view. In other words, when you put these glasses on, you don't see the entire world as a 3-dimensional, images around you. You see kind of like looking through a letterbox. And depending on the headset, the letterbox is either small or a bit bigger. And certain tasks, that's okay. But when you are dealing with firearm situations, you need to see the body, the whole body of the person you are standing in front. You need to see their face, their chest, where their hands are in particular, and their feet. And the reason is because they might draw a weapon, or they might have a concealed weapon, or there might be something else about that person. And when you're standing close to this simulated character, you can only see a cut-off portion. And an officer needs to be able to see immediately the entire view and length. And that was a critical limitation of the first generation of HoloLens. Although it's better, you still cannot stand close to a simulated character and see them whole length. And so that is a critical limitation for this sort of technology. The second example of limitations, which is not a fault of HoloLens, but is a problem of supply, is you saw people wearing gas-tight suits with respirators and full body protection for radiation. And then you try and cram a HoloLens over the top of this. it will not surprise you to know that this did not work stunningly. So what you really need for this sort of training is a augmented reality system that works with respirators. And as far as I'm aware today, because I've looked, because we have real applications for them, we have customers and people who would love to be able to do this today, it doesn't really exist. And so when you're training, you have to feel as unsafe and as constrained as you would do in a real situation. If you imagine being wrapped up like a boil in the bag fish, with an breathe very well and a very limited field of view, and then with thick gloves on and having to fumble around in a situation whereby if you step in the wrong place, you could get a lethal dose of radiation or set off a secondary device like an explosive. It's important that you don't break the immersion. And the technology of the day, today, right now, as far as I'm aware, unless somebody on this call wants to correct me, in which case I'm delighted, that this doesn't exist. And that then feeds into a whole series of industrial use cases as well, because good integration with personal protective equipment, if it's not done well and preserves peripheral image, because that's an important thing as well. A lot of the smart glasses you're seeing today, very nice, very sexy, but they block the side of the view. And what that means is that you are losing your peripheral vision. So if you're a maintenance engineer in a cramped space, you're going to bang your head a lot more often because you can't see the pipe that's next to you. And so there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on the technology, some of it quite simple, to make it practical and effective. Laura, is this the kind of thing you wanted to hear?
I'm absolutely delighted, yes, but I have a lot of questions as well, and the audience too had sent a number of questions, but we will discuss them after the talk about from Joe as well. Do you want to add anything else, Mike, on your side directly?
No, I'm very conscious that Joe needs a good share of the time, because he and I both not only have good haircuts, but also are very capable of self-expression. So Joe needs his self-expression too. I'm very interested in hear what Joe has to say.
Listen,
you're so generous. So Joe, it's to you. Thank you very much for being with us. So give our your light to our talk. Explain how do you see augmented reality, but most importantly, where do you see it going?
So I see it going more down a mobile front than Mike initially. And so I think it's going to track with mobiles for a while, at least on a popularity front. And then I think we would start to use it more in enterprise. So I think it's going to be the opposite way around to what's happening with VR. So VR is definitely more picked up on the training side when it comes to kind of corporate and enterprise, especially with things like soft skills. It works very well. The Royal College of Surgeons in London, I believe that they're using it as well, aren't they, for kind of like basic training on VR. And so as like an early stages thing, I think it works very, very well. But Mike is right. So once it starts getting to a point of now we need a more practical application for it, the headsets and things like that are still a little too heavy. They are blocking PPE that you would normally be wearing when kind of dealing with that situation. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think with AR as well, there are certain elements of tracking issues that we can have. So for instance, if it is a marker-based tracking system that's being used, it's fairly stable normally, but the drawback is that you always need a marker there to obviously load that experience. GPS is improving things, but not much. What I mean by that is that you're usually within about 1 meter or 2 of your kind of GPS location that you put in. So it's not kind of an exact spot on kind of like location area that the AR experience would be in. It will always be slightly off. Normally you'd have to employ things such as beacons to kind of get it, you know, perfect. If you're doing kind of like location-based games, which is obviously what we get involved in a lot. We also use Wi-Fi as well to obviously track. And then when it comes to plane loading experiences from a plane, it can be very touch and go. Let's put it like that. So some software is great, and it will be straight on a flat surface. You'll scan it and it will load brilliantly. Others, not so much, and it will shoot off and go all over the kind of location space that you're in. So it very much depends on the software that you're using, and probably the developer that you're getting to develop it as well, because that's where your advice ultimately is kind of coming from, and that is who is going to kind of lean you in the direction of, you know, do we do this where we go marker based and it's a little bit more stable, but obviously we need some kind of loading material, should we put it like that, that we need to get that experience loaded off of, or do we go with plane tracking that is a little bit more unstable because we're just looking for a flat surface of the ground. And so, yeah, it comes down to who is your information coming from, I think. And then again, yeah, what software that you're going to use to deploy your experience.
Thanks. Thank you very much. What have you got for us, Joe? What you want to do?
So I just brought a few things because I wasn't too sure. You just said bring a few things, so I did. So I brought some examples of some different projects that we've worked on over the last.
Let's say, let me just make a quick presentation. The idea for us for TiiQuTalks is to provide the audience the reason why technologies or the topics that we discuss about need to be or deserve to be discussed and looked into, and eventually could represent a career or a business opportunity for our audience. So I hear you. We hear you, Joe.
Okay, so what we work on primarily is location-based games and the designing of location-based games, but also over the years, as you can see, we've got kind of involved in different projects, be it kind of green screening musicians in like we did with Music Crowns, or whether it be kind of, as you can see from the Ubisoft, which is marker-based. So that's that there again with Fatal Fury. We've done a marker-based project there where it loads from a logo. I think the growth area, at least initially with AR, is very much within the marketing, digital marketing aspect. So if you actually talk to a lot of people, they'll see AR at the moment like a toy almost. So it's like an extended toy for social media. A lot of people obviously use social media. They're on Facebook. Yeah, we can stop sharing now. We don't need to just kind of look at a background. And so, yeah, a lot of people kind of use it for filters for their faces, as you see there, with different kind of masks and stuff like that. And I think on the digital marketing front, it really is, or could potentially explode with the right amount of quality content, which I think is another thing, Mike, that's kind of lacking, don't you?
Am I unmuted? Oh, yes.
You are, yeah.
Bad luck. Okay, so I can't talk about the sort of the advertising space because I'm not knowledgeable in it. But I think you're so okay, so let's do the obvious. There are hundreds of millions more augmented reality devices through mobile phones than any other medium.
Yes,
so,
it's the highest.
Apart from a few specialist people like Joe and myself, I don't know anybody who's got a pair of smart glasses or a headset.
Yeah, true.
So it's not something you see somebody walking down the street, or you go to a local shop. So it's my dog flapping his ears, in case you wanted the strange sounds. So it's not something you have yet, but it is mobile phones. So if I was Joe, that's what I'd be delivering on. I'd be delivering on Apple claimed 1 billion devices, I believe. So 1 billion mobile phones and tablets that you could have an augmented reality experience with, as opposed to, I don't know, a few 100,000, maybe 1 million smart glasses, if that. So we haven't reached a point yet where we're going to transition off phones.
But let me understand that if you think of mobiles, etc., you're thinking more of a gaming an association with the gaming space rather than the professional sphere.
No, not necessarily. So it could be very heavily used for product purchase, very, very heavily. In fact, if you look at a Harvard study, it will show that there's a 94% conversion rate with AR when used for products. Hence, that is why IKEA changed so fast and adopted it.
Yeah, basically, if you can be bothered to download the IKEA app and make it work, you're probably 3/4 of the way of making a purchase.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, my pastor was in retail business development, and yes, I do see it perfectly, but also in the property sector, it would be amazing. But let me understand. Finally, you are a slave of your Wi-Fi. So whatever is emerging countries or countries where there is not a stable and connection, it is impossible to use it, right?
Yes.
So are we building basically a layer of unfairness with sorry for being ethical, but that's a little bit the DNA of TiiQu. Let me understand. Is this the technology just for those that can?
Momentarily, yes. I would say yes. I'm not sure what your thoughts are, Mike, but I would say that while it's tracking with smartphone, the smartphone tech, the growth at the minute, from what I've seen from a Deloitte report, it's currently at around about 30% usage of AR on any mobile device. That is tracked to rise to around about 75% by 2025. So it's going to track with the growth of mobile. So, for instance, if you saw the recent explosion over the last couple of years of YouTube, once the smartphone devices began to take off in India, that again is what is going to happen, really. So that is what would happen with AR. As an example, Snapchat, 70% of their users are AR users. So 70% of their whole audience, 200 million users a day, all use Snapchat daily. That's a massive, massive audience that brands essentially, if you're not using it, are missing out on, because there's a lot of interaction that you could have directly with your fans. For instance, if you're a toy company, being able to show off your toy in AR quickly, let them play with it, then have them order it all through social media app, and it's done. You're probably a little bit mad for not at least.
So social media, mobile, AR,
yes.
Which means that the Facebook like will be the master of AR.
The master race.
And consequently also the owners of all the data that are associated with that. Right. Which means is a little bit terrifying.
True.
Please reassure me that there is a solution on the go.
With Facebook AR, they sorry, my phone's ringing as well at the same time. So with Facebook AR, what they've got at the moment, what they're doing with Spark, is that the search function with Instagram and with Facebook is not that great. So unless those apps or lenses, as they call them, are created and sent to you directly, or unless they're utilized for ads, they're not that well placed. Do you see what I mean? So I'm like, if we was to create one now live online and upload it, there's not really a good enough search function within Facebook or Instagram to actually, you know, have that appear properly without us sending it or sharing it to a user base. Do you see what I mean? So they've very much linked it to their ad system, Facebook, which is, I think, a little bit detrimental. I think it could have blown up a bit more if they'd done like a good search filter. But there's also web AR. Do you want to have a chat about that, Mike? What's going on with web AR?
I was going to deal with the Facebook issue first.
Oh yeah, go.
Which is there is this problem when with businesses, if you are the product, because there's basically two models. So model number one is I sell you a product, whatever that might be, a goods, service, transaction, whatever it might be. And the second one is you are the product. In other words, you get to use the service for free, but everything about you I sell on to others.
Yeah.
So you have this issue, and you've seen the reports recently from the Senate about the Facebook issues, but let's put that to one side. So there is a big problem with organizations' potential major conflict of interest in the way they operate. As to web AR and other solutions, platform independence, the ability to load content off the web is always very interesting. My experience of these things, they tend to have sad, lonely deaths in the end, and it never seems to work.
I think I agree with a couple. So there's a couple of platforms. In fact, Laura, we had this conversation like last week when you asked me what was kind of, are there holdbacks? And I said, yeah, there's holdbacks for SMEs kind of entering, because obviously a lot of clients are reluctant to get an app. They don't want an app for everything. Do you see what I mean? So they don't want an app so they order their products. They don't want another app so you can do this and that. And they just want one thing, really, or they just want you to be able to go to their website and view it off their webpage. Really, that's what they want. If you can utilize their social media accounts because they've already got them, again, that's great. They would want that. I see the holdback with web AR at the moment being pricing. It's very, very expensive for hosting, very expensive, overly so. If you're kind of talking to an SME, let's just say it was a small digital marketing agency who has a good amount of clients.
Can you give me an idea, please, of a cost, just to understand?
Right, so I would, it's around about $1,000 a month. Yeah, that's just for hosting. So that's without buying your, that's without paying for.
What is the amount of stuff that you can produce with £1,000 cost per month?
But that's just hosting. So that's not.
Yes, but hosting, how much? I mean, hosting, it depends on how much.
So from
hosting what, for example?
So what they do is they limit it to an amount of views.
Okay.
So to around about 100,000 views a month. That is around $1,000 a month. That's without your. So you also pay $99 for a developer's license. And then I believe you also put, there is an in-between commercialized license that they do as well. I'm not dead sure on the price of that. It keeps changing. It was $500. It could have gone up. So for 100,000 views, for a big brand, that's kind of fine. I've seen it done with Jumanji. So Jumanji launched a project. It was okay. It wasn't really anything special. It was done in web AR. They had it up for around about 3 or 4 months. Because obviously it's a big release film, they was paying for around about 500,000 views to 1 million views a month. Now we're talking $3,000 a month that they're paying just on hosting on that. Anywhere up to $5,000 a month, again, just on the hosting. That needs to really be brought in line with what is paid out for web hosting, you know? And so once that comes down a lot, then you'll start getting the SMEs take up a lot of kind of business, especially things like product manufacturers. It would help kind of immensely to display that product in AR and be able to display it straight off a browser. And so there's so much business that they're actually missing out on by overcharging, but they're more interested in just overcharging to try to claw the money now rather than playing that long-term game.
But trying to find to be creative, how could AR be used if costs were really very, very low? How could people benefit of AR? Is there a way to benefit? I mean, or is there a reason for companies, for hosting companies, to decrease so much the cost because it would increase so much the use?
Competition. So there's
no, that's competition, okay, but what could be the product, the AR product that could
it's going to come with clothing. Clothing will be probably the main one that drives it and also drives the price.
Okay.
So if you look at a lot of the clothing manufacturers, once they push forward to adopt it, because you'll have that try-on aspect of being able to try on your clothes indoors before you.
Yeah, sure. I saw a lot of fantastic things by very important brands online. Really fascinating. And this straight down to a question, but are we becoming kind of zombies?
Yeah. What do you think, Mike?
All we will do only things on virtual.
You've asked that to someone who would happily build a T800 if I could find the parts for it. So I think we should start with Mike.
All right. All right. So this goes back to P.T. Barnum. And P.T. Barnum was accused by if you've ever watched the film, and you should, The Greatest Showman, because it's a good film. There's one bit where one of his arch critics accused him of being a fraud. And he said, well, were the smiles a fraud? And so that's the point. If the emotion, the relationships, and the method of communication are still real, then the issue is, so people are walking around nearly getting crushed by a car, sitting on it. You go into a train, and everybody's there. Everybody's got their heads down in a phone.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean to say they're being antisocial. It means that they're just not talking to you. They're talking to somebody else. They're interacting with other people. So as long as that interaction continues, that's a good thing. The second problem you've got is the echo chamber. So it's now incredibly easy, and businesses make a good business at this, of amplifying and concentrating the sorts of content that you gravitate to, so people's horizons are much shorter. So, and there's a whole complex story about that, but that's a general problem to do with content engagement, search algorithms, business models, and it's not unique to AR. AR is a delivery mechanism, like a printed page, like a screen, like a typewriter. It's a cleverer medium. It can do more, but at the end of the day, it's a delivery mechanism.
I like this view of a delivery mechanism. It gives very well the idea, but still it is a delivery that engages and involves the user in a different way, and consequently it can work on the user brain and the users in a different way, possibly provide some kind of experience that engage the individual differently, or drive the individual to interact with the technology differently.
Yeah.
Then you're going into very dark areas, which is not just limited to augmented reality. So anything where there is an improper reward, which does not have a normalizing bias, and that is true of printed fiction, YouTube, virtual reality, augmented reality. So
Finally, a question, guys.
But I don't. It's a difference of degree rather than difference of kind.
Yeah, I would say AR and VR obviously offer that additional element of interactivity that
a book doesn't.
Well, yeah, what we would consider kind of more traditional content at the moment, which is kind of print or video, obviously doesn't. Yeah.
Would you say that it makes us, or it could make us, more productive?
Yeah, it could. Depending on how it's applied, and I think.
Well, it was fascinating. Before the start, you were talking about this thing that sent PDF from. Say it again, please, because I will not be able to.
The studio, we're going to have to find the post. So it came up on LinkedIn a while ago, where you can essentially take a photograph of your surroundings. So if there was a plant pot there, which is what I believe the video was, so there was a plant pot there, you could take a photo of the plant pot. You can then AR drop that photo straight into Photoshop from your phone using AR. I believe it's a Polish studio, so I'll have to double check because I'm not sure who made it. But yeah, it was a great example of kind of what could potentially be done down the line. Obviously, this is an app build. And I do think that it will start to go forward once we don't have to rely on an app to deploy, and you can just deploy it in line with either what a client has got or what you personally have. And so, I mean, for instance, there's tools that can be used. So there's an Italian company called Tough Nut to Crack. And so I would recommend looking those guys up. They've done an open source browser-based AR system realistically. So if you just download that, you can use that through Unity, have a play around. Obviously it's a lower end version of things like Eighth Wall and stuff like that, because it's open source and the guys there have just started working on it. But it's things like those guys that are actually breaking the ground. Like those are the guys that I'm seeing as taking things forward. Granted, they're giving it away for free, but the amount of people that are actually now adding to that project and helping everyone go forward because of it, is great. It's a great thing to see. There is a good community, I think, around AR, but it's just very fractured.
Can you just repeat the name of, I see a question, the name of the company, please?
My company is called Gallant Road Limited.
No, sorry, not your company, but the project you just mentioned.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. You have to look.
Okay.
So I've looked it up to send it to you. So
okay, you just posted on LinkedIn in the event. So let me understand, what is the interaction between VR and AR, and technically speaking, and well, business perspective, I guess it is quite clear, but technically speaking, is that where is the connection? Where is the interaction?
Okay, probably one for me, I would think. So a lot of the subsystems of the technology have a common application. So things called inside-out tracking, which is common on a lot of the standalone headsets now, where you have cameras looking out to track the position of the headset, so that you can work out that you're turning left, turning right, how high up you are off of the floor. So you can generate the picture in VR to match that image. So that sort of technology applies to augmented reality as well. It uses the same sort of technology, what's called simultaneous location and mapping, or what's called visual odometry as well. So that there is a piece of that. The displays technology, sort of, but the way forward is what's called waveguide optics, which is very different, much more complicated than the way that a traditional VR headset does it. So in a traditional VR headset, when I built my first one, I took a tiny black and white television set, which was a Sinclair flat screen television set. I chopped up two magnifying glasses, and I stuck it all together with Perspex. Now, you may laugh, but actually,
I think that's brilliant.
Far off today. They use better shaped optics. They use much thinner displays than I ever had to play with, and they put it in flashy stuff. And I made a homemade tracker, which was a magnetic-based tracker, and we moved on from magnetics to but it's the same stuff. Whereas augmented reality, the really good stuff, you have a sheet of glass, and you have a tiny display, and it's bonded to the sheet of glass, and it then reflects the light inside the sheet that it kind of concertinas down until it hits a structure in the glass, and that then causes part of the picture to be projected into your eye. So it's a much more sophisticated system. And so rather than having a big display, you can get away with big displays you see on VR headsets. The kind of displays that are in augmented reality are much smaller than my fingernail, and bonded onto this glass within getting onto the wavelength of light. It's really accurate. It's very difficult physics. So there's a lot of things that's different between the two.
Nanotechnologies has some huge difficulties at the moment to keep the pace with the need.
It's not nano level, but it's micro level, so it's 1,000 times bigger. But it's still really tiny and really hard and really clever. There's a couple of people who are good at this. So the Israeli companies are good at this. There's a few US ones as well, and there's a British one too. My friends at BAE Systems, they've spent a lifetime developing head-up displays for pilots. So there are similarities. They all kind of fit on your head, and they all play sound in your ears, and they all kind of use tracking systems. But then the optics side is quite different.
Virtual reality and augmented reality. Can we have augmented reality in virtual reality? So can I look at an individual's body as a doctor in a virtual reality? So maybe, I don't know, the guy is in Africa and I'm a doctor in the UK, and I can eventually teach to another doctor in Africa how to operate a specific disease, for example. Is that feasible? Is a dream?
No, so for on a technical standpoint, you're just looking at setting up one end with a camera capable of segmentation. Like if you kind of do it like that, and then obviously on the opposite end, it would come through as kind of like a more clearer image. There's a volumetric company, Mike. I don't know if you've seen them. They're up for an award, I think. So they've done some really good work in kind of like volumetric cameras and stuff like that. And so yeah, that's a possibility probably in the next year or two.
Okay, so there's a fundamental difference between it's quite an interesting one. So what you're saying is you're putting real world objects inside a virtual space, as opposed to putting virtual objects inside. That
would be fantastic.
There's the other way around, but people are doing that.
Yeah.
So some of the latest, as the Varjo headset, I think, has got, which is a very good headset. Has got stereo cameras on the front and can do image processing, so it can scan a scene. So what you see actually on the headset, a lot of it is in fact re-imaging and turning the 3D, the real world, into a digital copy, and then inserting extra bits in it. So robotic cell, for example, the example I've seen is a robotic cell. Plenty of stuff on YouTube. Which shows, and so that the optics are looking at the real world and going into the computer, working out the real world, redrawing it, adding in the robot, and then finally displaying this kind of mashup together to you. So it's being done, and there are some really good use cases for that, where clash detection and robot cell operations are they easier? I think it's a very good technological demonstration. I'm not sure that many people will be compelled to part with a check for that particular thing. There are motor car companies and people who really want to replace the clay model for a visualization of components are now, I think, fully across with this kind of mixed reality view. But traditional engineering of chemical plants and stuff is still done on 2D, still done on a monitor like this one here. And they've had the opportunity for 20 years to change, and they don't see the business benefit.
So what are basically the costs of projects in the AR space? Can we give some examples from the very basic gaming thing up to the more complex and more strategic ones in specific industries? It may help to have an idea of what could be worth on to work on.
As an example, so for things that we've been involved with, something like if you was going to do like a small, quick Snapchat filter, yeah, looking at anywhere between a few hundred to, say, $1,000, pounds. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at something that's more, say, medical based, which we've been involved in, you're looking anywhere between 6 to 10 million, depending on the size of the project and the amount of time on it. Something like that will probably take place over around about 4 years and get broken down into lots, so like modules that you'd have to work on. So it's very, very, very varied depending on what area you choose to go in. Mike, you could probably go like astronomical figures higher than that, couldn't you, on some MOD stuff and things like that?
But okay, so it's true. So if you're looking at things like flight simulators for helicopters, they were tens of millions of pounds, but there is now downward pressure. So what you're finding now is that this kind of middle ground in the low millions that the MOD and others are prepared to pay, because they spend 10 years developing a flight simulator, and they go home and their 14-year-old son or daughter is playing on an NVIDIA graphics card, which is 10 years newer, and has got better graphics performance than what they've got from their, I won't mention the company's names.
I know both of them.
So there's an issue. So what this is causing down, so you're getting a situation now where a lot of military tech, it's not the technology, it's the content that's the secret bit. And they are using Unity, and they are using Unreal, and they are using, so some of the stuff is specialist. They're using they're using more COT stuff than they've ever used, because it's good enough.
Is the military space investing a lot because they can, or because it's really the crucial place where AR can be adopted?
It already has been. So if you're a fast jet fighter today, and you're flying a Typhoon or an F-35, the bulk of the information that you're transacting your flight on is in your helmet. And the next generation of jet fighters that are being built by BAE Systems, my friends at Filton, they will have almost no displays in the cockpit at all. So you get into the cockpit, and there might be a small iPad type display just in case everything goes completely wrong, but you're almost completely reliant on the flight helmet and the true augmented reality view that it presents, because you can do things like stare through the floor of the aeroplane to see the enemy fighter below you. So one of the reasons why the F-35 is so expensive is they've got cameras facing in every single direction. Then you restitch the image of the world around the jet, and it removes the walls. It's transparent armor. You can remove the walls of the vehicle and stare in any direction unencumbered. A huge advantage.
Absolutely. Let's go to on something more light, fashion. Somebody here said talked about retail being the ideal context, or one of the best for adopting AI. I think that I absolutely agree. But let me understand, Zara, or anybody like Zara, with millions of articles and items. Is that feasible? I mean, one thing is translating one piece in something that can be wear through AR, but thinking of millions, or let's say thousands of articles per month, it must be an enormous cost. Will it worth the cost?
I think initially it's going to work better for products. And so it would start with, like it did with IKEA, so it would be products such as furniture, toy lines.
Okay, high cost, highly costly. I mean,
no, so these are things that where they're already making CAD models, because they're already making the CAD models either for the design of the furniture, the design of the toy. It's similar with clothes, but it just depends on the clothes company. So that is why I haven't said yes. That's why I didn't say yes. So it depends on who is making the clothes, because obviously sometimes they will do it all in CG. And if they do, they've got a perfect item that they can launch. They've already made it.
right.
That's what obviously made it so easy for IKEA to launch, because a lot of the products that they've launched, they actually already had made, because it was made at the design stage.
All right. And so the piece, the AR piece, would be an additional cost that would only be related to the hosting costs. Well, there will be some translation as well, I guess.
I would suspect there's other issues. I mean, I know Joe's, and he's quite right. So if you're a tiny business like me, then spending £30,000 a year on hosting costs for AR content, I couldn't get a return on investment. I wouldn't be interested.
Of course.
If you're somebody like Primark, where you've got lots of money to spend, then maybe. But I completely agree. If you've got a digital twin of the thing you are selling, and these tend to be driven by the more together organizations, and generally the more profit margin you make, the better organized you are. That's not a surprise. You can afford to be organized. But supermarkets are the other one. Then it's relatively easy to put it into the tool chain, because you, as Joe says, you're already designing the product, or you're sending a CAD specification out to somebody to get it made. It just requires you to insert it in the right way. Okay, so let's talk about the skills. Who is the skilled person who can implement AR stuff? What are the skills involved? How many skills are involved? How do they integrate the skills? What a company should have in terms of AR? Well, of course, coming to you and asking to you the product, obviously, but.
So you're at least looking at someone who is familiar with Cinema 4D or 3D creation software, at the very least, just to create your assets if you're looking to go CG. You can also obviously use video content or images if need be. You can use pretty much anything really. But I would say that you need a basic knowledge of that, again, with UI design. So you need a graphic design designer or design experience. And then you're coming to the software. So you'd need a dev, preferably someone that's good at C. If not, maybe they could use Unity, use Blueprints, as they have just purchased Wikitude, who are a fairly strong AR SDK. And so that kind of looks interesting, I think, in the future with what they're doing at Unreal.
Anything to add, Mike?
Oh, that's a very interesting one. Well, you know, Joe runs a business doing this properly. Right, okay. A lot. So in the research, military sort of high-end application side, it tends to be, and gaming tends to be your Unity. And the reason why it tends to be Unity, and so what Joe said about getting your assets, in other words, there's 2 or 3 pieces to it. There is the pure game design, which people forget. A good storyteller. You need a good story. And I've played and gone back to games that are not cutting edge and are brilliant and experiences because the story is so compelling, better than the production value. And I played other games which have amazing production value, and I dropped because the story wasn't compelling. So you need a good storyteller. That's a really important trait, and people forget that. A real creative who can vision stuff, and whether it's a brand or a story, a digital experience, a historical reenactment, a game, that storytelling is a real art, real art. The ability to draw it, whether it's, as Joe says, using a 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional system, in other words, 3D plus time, the animation side of it. We need that. What's happening now a lot, and certainly with the latest generation of software from Apple, and I guess the others will follow suit, is mainstreaming photogrammetry. So what photogrammetry is taking a whole bunch of pictures and then digitally reconstructing that object in 3D from the pictures. So what that does is it de-skills some of the artistry. So if you were doing a food app, for example, and you wanted to have digital pizzas, this is the example Apple have used themselves, then you just take 50 or 60 pictures of the pizza, you shove it into the image processing pipeline, and voila, out of the end comes a USDZ model of your pizza, which you can then deploy in 3D.
Yeah, that's it. They've come up with some really good tech, Apple, especially around AR. I'm looking forward to the glasses. It's going to be interesting to see.
My worry is the Apple AR glasses are like fusion power. Fusion
power. I think they're definitely
30 years. They'll be with us in 30 years. And Apple's AR glasses is every 3. It's going to be 3 years from now. I've been hearing that for the past 10 years.
It's probably going to be another 10 years, Mike. So just to go back to the beginning, when I mentioned the Photoshop app, it was actually made by Carnegie Mellon University. So if you want to take a look at that, it's called Merge Reality.
Good old Carnegie Mellon.
And so yes.
I'm sorry, I'm without the screen. There is something that is happening on my laptop. Forgive me, but I have a couple of questions here from the audience that I want to submit to you. The first is that something that I'm going to read. How are industry players are overcoming technophobia with end users? What are the challenges that industry players are facing when appealing to the mainstream audience?
Right. Okay. What is mainstream? All right. So if I go on this one, because my demographic is very different to Joe's.
Yeah, sure.
I could listen. I might be 90. We don't know this yet. I just haven't confirmed.
Very different. No, but you know, but I I worked on a project which was a virtual reality. Excuse me, the dog is just. What do you want? You're not getting a biscuit. Sorry, I'm sitting there looking at me. I think it's a mistake. Anyway, so the point. Let's go back to fire services. So we developed the first virtual reality based, nudging my elbow, go away. First virtual reality based fire service training system for fire commanders when released it in 1997. And it was on P90s and GeForce graphics cards, and you can imagine how hokey it was, but it worked. And so you found that there was an age divide, and so commanders in their 30s who had home computers got on with that quite well, but anybody 35, 40 had a real problem with it until they realized they didn't have to use the technology. They had an operator. So as long as you had somebody to drive the simulation system for them, and they were then standing in the command area and seeing the fire and the fire engines and the firefighters and directing it with a radio, and they were interacting in a normal way, they soon got over the phobia. There was an initial, it can't be as good as reality argument, but in certain ways, simulations can be better than the reality that you can simulate using real things. So for example, to simulate, they take 2 fire engines with 10 people off the run. In other words, they're no longer serving operational duties. They bring them to a training center and they have a concrete training tower, and they say, just pretend that's a skyscraper. And if you're lucky, they'll get, but they don't do this much now because of the environmental risk. They used to set fire to it. So they put a crib, which is literally like a cage, stock it with wood and stuff, and set fire to it to generate real smoke and real fire and real heat. And they will put dummies in. And so, base sackcloth characters weighing the same as a 70 kilogram human, and tell them to go and rescue it. So in certain things, the heat and the weight and the physical stress is the same, but the visual experience and the number of players you can afford to bring to the scene was a lot less than what could be done in simulation. So you're able to exercise different skills. But yes, there is a generational divide, and I should imagine a lot of Joe's demographic is Gen Z millennial, and there are people now born. My daughter, who's 9, and my son, who's 11, just about, are the iPad generation. They never knew a time without an iPad. And so it's going to be a major generational shift as that works its way through the system.
Thank you.
Yeah, our kind of, I don't want to say our demographic, but millennials and things like Gen Z, yeah, are definitely the biggest users. I wouldn't count them in as a technophobe side. They're kind
they're technophilic. They love it.
Yeah, they absolutely love it. So, I mean, all you got to do is kind of go on Instagram and see all the filters that are being used to kind of see how much that generation, those 2 generations, have completely really adopted AR as it is. As I said before, 70% of the users on Snapchat each day are using it, and that user base is very much 18 to 35, if not leaning probably younger. It's probably 14 to about 35. And they're kind of big adopters of it. I think the holdback on the technophobe side really comes with things like the downloads. And so I think a lot revolves around switching to browser just because it's easy. And so getting people to download an app is a pain, I think. But yeah, I would say that there's not in the younger generation. I think that's very, very much there.
Thank you. I've got another question which is more technical. Which AR software allows a full use of motion tracking with a full depth detection for tracking of body parts moving? Is going a golf swing? Is doing a golf swing? Sorry for the reading, but because, yeah, go ahead.
If you're looking at something that goes 360, you're probably still looking at using trackers on the body. I would say. I mean, normal software would work. So Unity, you could do it in. If you're looking for SDKs, Vuforia would do it. Wikitude would do it. But I think you would, if you're looking for kind of really tight body tracking, you would still need the trackers. As an example of kind of like basic level tracking, body tracking, Snapchat do it. so that it's capable of actually doing full body tracking. But once you try to turn and move, it hasn't got that whole 360 element, so it kind of starts throwing out a little bit. And so, yeah, I would say without trackers, it's very, very difficult to do a real tight body motion at the moment. I mean, what do you think, Mike?
So I've had a couple of projects where we've used motion capture suits. In other words,
yeah,
something that you feel like you ought to be burgling a skyscraper with.
The Rococos.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah, lovely suits.
So for those who don't know, they're basically Velcro suits with optic fibers and all sorts of sensors wired in to detect your flexion and motion of movement. And that produces really good, accurate body capture. I've used, or certainly I evaluated the latest Apple pose estimation software. It's not bad, but you couldn't use it. It faults now and again, so it's not necessarily reliable. So it depends. You probably could, if you're on a budget, you could probably do quite a lot with it. And the thing is, never underestimate the power of ingenuity if you've got no money.
No, in fact, as you mentioned, on a budget. So as an example, if someone is on a budget, things like purchasing an old Microsoft Kinect, probably a Kinect 2, right? Seriously, it's right though, Mike, isn't it? Right, so if you get this, you probably get it for £100, maybe less, 60 off of eBay.
8 for a pint.
Exactly, right. So get that. You can hook it up to Unity. Once you install the SDK for Kinect, you can start actually doing a decent level of body tracking. So it's not too sad. I think that's a bit of wasted tech from Microsoft, really, because they kind of abandoned it, but it actually had a really good camera system, and they just sort of gave up on it.
It wasn't abandoned. Apple went along and bought the company and integrated it into Face ID.
I thought Microsoft just gave it up, and that's why we've never got another Kinect.
No, I'm pretty certain that Apple bought the Israeli company that did the.
Done it. Oh, I didn't know that.
So every time you pick up your whatever it was, iPhone 10 and above, that structured light scanner in front of my iPhone. Is the ultra miniaturized version
of that.
In fact, there are some apps you can get which read out the depth data, and you can get a digital scan of your face. You can actually pull out what this little device is seeing.
Yeah, Apple's definitely best at depth, especially compared to any Android device. That's going to get you the best depth for kind of AR and bringing the experience in, and even the scanning. So with the photo scanning that they brought in on the most recent version, it's great. The photogrammetry that they've brought in is definitely going to simplify things. As another example, Unreal, once that upgrades to 5 fully, so I don't know if anyone's kind of had a chance to play around with the early release, but when at the moment they're doing they've got megapixels. So obviously in VR and AR, we have a polygon issue, should we say, where we can only display a certain amount of polygons within a scene, within one frame that's in front of you. That amount usually in VR is around about 200,000. In AR, it kind of ranges, depends again what you're kind of using, to what file size it can handle. Hopefully Unreal are going to kind of break the mold on that one with what they're doing with Unreal 5. That for VR looks so promising, but I don't believe it's VR ready yet with what they're doing. And so yeah, they've got a new render system as part of the new release, and it looks amazing. Like it really does. It's so realistic. It's great.
Yes, I was. Thank you, Joe. I was in one of the latest TiiQuTalks. We were talking about virtual reality and how eventually it can integrate with the blockchain. Which do you think are the best technologies that in the future will integrate with augmented reality? What do you see the benefit eventually of an integration with other technologies?
I think it would work really, really well for collectors. So for instance, if someone had a wallet where you could display AR NFTs, it would work extremely well with things like Panini football cards and stuff like that. So I know that they're doing on flat so they're doing kind of basic NFTs, Panini. I think Topps are doing them as well as a few other kind of card collection companies. I've seen them for the NFL and the NBA as well. But if it was kind of figurines, so for instance, I have friends and their children are kind of big collectors of the small action figures, things that do very well for Marvel and kind of Disney. Displaying those things like Spyro. So do you remember when Spyro came out? They released Spyro. You had the little Spyro figure. You could drop it on a pad, and your little Spyro figure would actually fight against another, similar to Pokemon, really. But you had a physical element to the game. That could very much be done within AR and through NFT blockchain. And so yeah, you could own it and own that physical, well, that digital representation, but in augmented reality, it would just need a display method on the phone end, which comes with the wallet, I would say.
All right. Any other creative way of thinking further interaction with other technologies, not necessarily blockchain? Of course, I'm fun about blockchain, but that's another topic. Is there? Well, we see very much the future about different worlds interacting with each other, and probably is the only way to go, especially in a more virtualized world. So which are the other technologies that would make sense to see as a potential enablers of the virtual reality and augmented reality?
Machine learning.
Yeah.
Machine learning.
The big
And
one.
why? What is the adoption of machine learning in augmented reality?
Well, the number of use cases. It's to do with being able to take the real world and make sense of it. So that's where you get most of the benefit. So putting an augmentation on a scene, that's quite interesting. But if that augmentation is related to the scene, then it becomes critical. So you see it all. Self-driving cars, perfect example. Although you're not using augmented reality for self-driving cars, the technology of being able to scan a street, identify all the lampposts, identify the speed signs, identify the risks and the hazards, pull up the vehicles, and build a three-dimensional model. Doesn't take a genius to say you can pipe that directly into an AR system, and you've got a real-time feed with understanding and context relevant to your use case coming into you. And so there are civilian, transportation, safety, scientific, military, of course.
That's fantastic. It's an incredible vision, for sure.
It's not my vision, it's somebody else's. So the other thing that is underestimated, but is really important for augmented and virtual reality, is good quality voice assistants. And I know that they're a lot better. They still suck.
Yeah.
But the ability to interact, we've all watched Iron Man, and we all want a computer. I want a computer like Jarvis. I would love to have a computer like Jarvis. I don't get one. Okay, and Siri isn't bad, but it's not Jarvis, and I can't do all the tasks that I would love to do, because if you're wearing an AR headset, you don't want a keyboard. What's the point? You actually want to talk to it and have it react in a way that understands what you actually want it to do and not get it wrong. So it's got to have a very high ability to be accurate and execute those tasks accurately. And I still find Siri frustrating. And so you couldn't fly a plane with your voice.
Yeah.
Of course. Another use case, I'd like to use your imagination for education. How augmented reality could help education?
Digital hell for children who don't do their homework when I ask them to.
It mainly, so I think at the moment.
So you know what I mean. So
for immediate value for kind of AR is things like having it as an addition to what you've already got. So things like the printed materials that are already in schools, for instance, say, as we're using education as an example, adding kind of AR interactivity to that would do a lot. So it would help with kind of just on a smaller level with practical learning skills. Things like well-being works well with education as well, so they can kind of go hand in hand. But again, Laura, this does depend very, very much on how it is delivered. Do you see what I mean? So it's one thing to say, we're going to make a music well-being app, but if you deliver it badly, it's not going to work. Do you see what I mean? And so
yeah, that's like with code, basically.
Yeah, and so I think there's elements that I think work really, really well, especially for education. I personally think that VR works better for training and learning. So I think it's more conducive with training and learning VR. AR, I think, is much more to enhance. So I think it should be seen as that. It's much more to enhance an area or a product or something that's there. So I've got this kind of split view, I think, between the two of what is practical, mainly because of just what's available at the moment. I mean, hopefully we get to a stage where we're all kind of walking around and holograms do jump out at us, just like Back to the Future 3, you know, but we're not there yet. And it's that, I think.
Okay, let's make a kind of projection exercise. What will win the race, virtual reality or augmented reality?
Ooh. As in what?
In terms of volumes, which gives the more opportunities?
AR is going to give more opportunity in the long term, but mainly because of retail. So once it's fully adopted by retail, it's got much longer legs.
So you don't see a future where everyone will go around on the road with nicer glasses for seeing what they don't see, but you see it more on, let's say, a purchasing feature that enhance the experience.
What I would like to happen is, and I'm sure that a lot of other people would like to happen, is that VR basically becomes like the holodeck in Star Trek, right? So so there is no headset. You can just kind of stroll around. That sort of becomes VR. And I still think AR would still be kind of, as you said, as an overlay where you're kind of wearing glasses, or you have like an additional kind of feature on the device. What we're hoping for really is that kind of Google push it forward with the Chrome browser, say, for instance, so it's very, very easy access to the information and AR information, let's put it like that, just through normal browser-based service. And so I think AR has longer legs because of that. There's just a lot more applications that it can be applied to. But once it comes to that training and learning aspect, VR is going to be incredibly important. So more so than AR, I feel.
Mike, what do you think?
Well, the clue's in the name. Augmented reality augments what you have around you already. And so there's more opportunities to do that all the time. As soon as you close yourself off completely from the real world, that is virtual reality, then picking up a cup of coffee becomes a challenge. Not knocking the cat or the dog over becomes a challenge. There's all sorts of things, and there are solutions to this. But generally speaking, I agree with Joe. More opportunities in augmenting the existing world than completely cutting you off from it, and you're less likely to get sick. That's a fairly major.
Yeah, there is a bonus of not feeling motion sickness in AR.
All right, okay, guys, we have another 10 or something minutes. I want to submit you a question, the top question from TiiQuTalks. What do you think is the one question that any AR expert should be able to answer? Think if you are hiring somebody who is supposed to help you in doing whatever, what would you demand? Absolutely, what you expect him or her to know?
Does it have a gyroscope? At the very least, they should know that for AR. That is a definite basic thing. Does the phone have a gyroscope? Especially if you're loading any software on there. Definitely a basic knowledge of Unity. That is going to be the core starting point really for anyone getting into AR.
All right, but if you want to make to ask a question to this candidate, what would be the question?
Mike.
Job role. Okay, so as it's not like that. I don't think it's like that. So it's like saying to somebody, so take a motor car. So if you're an interior designer of a motor car, you want to ask some questions on interior design. If they're a combustion specialist, you want to ask some questions on combustion specialist. So it entirely depends on the job role. So,
okay.
So I would say because it's question.
Okay, let's take a technical role, somebody that needs to develop this thing.
Oh, the one question.
So I got it that you need a designer, that you need well, of course, a business owner that ask the product. But technically speaking, what would you ask to a person that would need to implement this thing?
Can you build this app?
Look, I've drawn a little picture.
That's it.
Come on, guys.
There's only one way
I
to know.
want an photo from you.
So there's only one way to know whether somebody can cook, and you say, "Here's the ingredients. There's the stove. We'll give you an hour or so. We'll come back in a bit. We'll see what you can do." So that's so when I've done recruiting in the past, that's what we used to do. One of the things we used to do is look at their personal skills and attributes. What are they like as a human being? Are they not? In fact, they never realized it, but they were interviewed the moment they stepped in the building. So the lady who greeted them was part of the interview process.
Yeah, in one side, yeah, absolutely.
If they were rude to Kim, they never got the job.
Yeah, I agree with him there. It does. It depends how you treat people to kind of how you get the job.
Absolutely. So the moment whoever they interacted with, we went round and asked everybody, were they nice to you? How did they behave? What did you think?
Okay, let's take it differently. How did you start to be involved? What made you be involved in the sector in augmented reality? Both. Starting from you, Joe.
Oh, okay. Starting with me. So I got into it because I got bored, and so I initially came from filmmaking, and was making kind of music videos and stuff like that for artists when I was younger. I worked at a PR company, worked a little bit in CG, and so I kind of come from the filmmaking art kind of CGI art kind of end, and looked at it as a way of kind of displaying my favorite video game characters initially. So that was kind of
okay. And so the second step was to learn what? Unity.
Okay. Straight away. So yeah, so it was to learn Unity, learn all about Vuforia initially, and then I went on to learning AR Core, and AR Kit. Then I got a job doing it, so I switched over.
Right. Very good. You answered perfectly to my question. And what about you, Mike?
Oh,
what was why did you enter into space, and what did you learn first?
Why did I do it? That's Does he holding the?
That's not a bad question. I'm not asking you about your life.
The desire to want to be somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that is it. I agree with that.
Mundane world in which we live.
It became like an exercise of what else can I bring into the world. Do you see what I mean? Like
exciting.
Yeah, I know. So it's just kind of like, can I bring a whole Kraken, into my road in AR and test it out and just see if it actually works, and does it kind of overtake next door's house and things. It starts off with things like that and then grows into let's make a game and things, and it just extends, I think.
All right, that's fantastic. And Mike, you're not answering. What did you learn first?
What I learned first. Well, don't forget, I'm going back. So I learned to program on a Sinclair ZX80.
Oh, I've got one in the loft. They're serious.
My brother soldered himself together, so I helped him solder it. I was 11, I think, at the time.
All right.
So when did I get proper 3D graphics?
Amiga.
No, it was BBC. It was BBC.
Yeah.
It would have been which game was it? It was the precursor to Elite. It was the game involving flying a Spitfire. I can't remember the name. And so as soon as you could see what you could do, then you thought, crikey, I can have a go at doing this myself. And so that's kind of how it started. But yeah, so I then, that's why I wanted to get into doing computer graphics, is to do, you know, I couldn't ever afford to build a copy of the Bridge of the Enterprise because I'm that sad.
Okay.
But I can make a wireframe, and I did. I made a wireframe version that I could go around inside and fly.
Fantastic. Okay, guys, we have another 8 minutes. I want a last thought, not forever, just for today, from you, addressed to people who want to get involved or who want to implement stuff in AR.
Mm-hmm. How to get involved, like initially?
Yeah, for example, it could be you should address a thought to those who want to be involved or those who want to implement something, so a company or a whatever.
There's 2 questions then.
Yeah, 2 questions in one.
Question 1.
Because the target is 2, those who have to build and those who have to sell, basically.
I think if you're going to get into it, see, we could go and just say, look, you know, download Unity and get like an easy SDK to learn, like Vuforia or Wiki. You could use them. So that's one route. I think the actual easiest route to learn as a starter, just to get you used to things, if you download Lens Studio, which is the Snapchat program, essentially, and just have a play with that. You can have, there's some basic templates on there, and it's very much a starter thing. And so don't kind of go on there and think you're going to be able to do anything massively advanced, because you're not. You've only got about 8 meg of kind of assets that you can use within a little project. But just as a test to try things and to see what you can do and play with ideas that you have, that is very much a good starter. Then use that to progress to Unity, because obviously you want to really start getting into the coding of WebGL and stuff like that, which is hopefully going to kick in with the next release or future releases, and we get the whole kind of browser-based AR up and running. From a client aspect, Mike, any opinions?
Okay, so it depends on what it all depends on what you're trying to do. And
I see, that's why I've thought of like, what's the simplest thing to use as a investment?
It's always return on investment. It's going to cost you a lot. It's going to cost you more than you think.
Yeah.
It'll be more difficult than you think. It'll do less than you expect.
Yeah.
And you need to make sure that you've got a very compelling story and a very compelling return on investment model before you go down that route.
Yeah, I would agree with the return on investment model. You should always have someone that designs for you. If you're looking at it sort of like from a retail or client aspect, they have to kind of fit in that KPI of, you know, there needs to be an earn on the back end. So there needs to be some kind of clickable element where there's a purchase made for it to be viable for kind of like a corporate, let's put it like that.
But it can deliver an awful lot of value. I mean, Joe's testament. Joe you run a business doing this, so therefore it must be good. But I suspect it's like motor racing. If you want to start out making a small fortune at augmented reality, you begin with a big one.